Once upon a time, in a small village surrounded by dense forests, lived two inseparable friends named Jack and David. Jack was adventurous by nature, always seeking thrills and new discoveries, while David was more cautious, preferring to think things through before acting. Despite their differences, their friendship was deep, and they trusted each other completely. One day, as Jack and David were sitting under a large oak tree near the village square, an old traveler arrived in town. The man was weathered, his clothes torn, and his face worn with the marks of many journeys. He carried a bag full of stories, which he shared with the villagers. One story, in particular, caught Jack's attention: the tale of a mysterious river hidden deep in the forest. The old man's voice lowered as he described the river. "It's not like any river you've seen. Its waters shimmer, even in the darkest of nights. And it's said that anyone who reaches it will find treasures beyond their wildest dreams. But beware," he warned. "Many who've sought the river have never returned." Jack's eyes sparkled with excitement, but David felt uneasy. "Jack, that sounds dangerous. If no one's ever returned, there must be a reason," David said, his voice filled with concern. Jack, however, was too intrigued to listen. "Think about it, David. If we find the river, we could be rich. We wouldn't have to work another day in our lives." David shook his head, but deep down, he knew there was no stopping Jack once he set his mind to something. After days of persuasion, Jack finally convinced David to join him on the adventure. They planned to leave early the next morning, before the village elders could dissuade them. As the sun rose, the two friends packed their bags with food, water, and a few tools, preparing themselves for the unknown. The forest was dense, with trees so tall that they seemed to touch the sky. Birds sang strange melodies, and the air was thick with the smell of moss and earth. Every now and then, they would hear the distant howl of an animal or the rustling of leaves, making David more nervous with every step. "Are you sure about this, Jack?" David asked for the 10th time, glancing around anxiously. "Don't worry, David. We'll be fine. Just think about the treasure waiting for us," Jack said confidently, marching ahead with determination. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the trees began to look older, and the path became less defined. The forest felt alive in a way they hadn't noticed before, as though it was watching their every move. The light from the sun grew dimmer, and the temperature dropped. David's uneasiness grew with every step, but Jack was too focused on the promise of the mysterious river to notice. After hours of walking, they came across a strange path, almost hidden beneath the overgrowth. Jack's excitement returned. "This must be it. We're close," he exclaimed, urging David to follow quickly. The path led them to a clearing where, to their amazement, they finally heard the sound of flowing water. Jack's face lit up. "We found it!" he shouted, rushing toward the sound. As they reached the clearing, they saw the river. It was unlike any river they had ever seen. The water shimmered with a strange glow, as if it was made of liquid silver. The air around it was still, too still, and a faint mist hovered just above the surface. David hesitated, sensing that something wasn't right. "Jack, this doesn't feel right. We should leave," he urged, but Jack was already bending down, cupping the strange water in his hands. "Look at it, David. It's incredible," he said, mesmerized by the shimmering liquid. But as soon as the water touched Jack's skin, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Suddenly, the once still river started moving violently, as if something deep beneath its surface had been disturbed. Jack stumbled backward, nearly falling into the water. David quickly grabbed him by the arm, pulling him back to safety. "This place is dangerous, Jack. We need to get out of here," David shouted, panic rising in his voice. Reluctantly, Jack agreed. They turned and tried to retrace their steps, but the path they had taken to get there was gone. In its place was a thick fog that obscured everything. They were lost. "We should have never come here," Jack muttered, regret filling his voice. David tried to stay calm. "We'll find our way back. We just need to stay together and think," he said, though even he wasn't sure how they would escape. As they walked through the thick fog, strange shapes seemed to move in the mist. Whispering voices echoed all around them, calling their names. The forest, which had once felt alive with nature, now felt sinister and dangerous. Every step felt heavier, as if the ground itself was trying to hold them back. "Jack, do you hear that?" David whispered, his heart pounding in his chest. Jack nodded, his earlier excitement completely gone, replaced by fear. "It's like the river is calling us," he said quietly. They continued walking, but no matter how far they went, they couldn't escape the fog. The river's whispers grew louder, and strange shadows flickered in the mist. It was as if the forest itself was trying to trap them, to pull them back to the river. "We're not getting out of here, are we?" Jack asked, his voice trembling. David didn't answer. He didn't want to admit that they might be trapped forever, lost in the mysterious forest. But just as hope was beginning to fade, a faint light appeared in the distance. It flickered like a small flame, but it was enough to give them a direction. "Look," David pointed. "Maybe that's our way out." The two friends hurried towards the light. As they got closer, they saw that it was a small fire, burning near a wooden hut. An old hermit, dressed in ragged clothes, sat beside the fire, warming his hands. "You shouldn't have gone to the river," the hermit said, without even looking up. His voice was rough, like gravel scraping against stone. Jack and David exchanged nervous glances. "How do you know?" Jack asked. The hermit finally looked up, his eyes sharp and wise. "I've seen many like you," he said. "The river lures people with the promise of treasure, but it feeds on greed. Those who seek it with pure hearts may escape, but those who seek it out of greed are trapped forever." Jack shivered. "We were only looking for the treasure. We didn't mean any harm," he said, guilt washing over him. The hermit smiled faintly. "Greed doesn't always come with bad intentions, but it blinds you to the dangers around you," he said. "The forest knows your heart, and it leads you astray if your intentions are not pure." David, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Can you help us find our way back?" The hermit nodded. "Follow me," he said, rising to his feet. He led them through the dense forest, navigating the fog and shadows with ease. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the edge of the forest. The familiar village lights twinkled in the distance. "You're free now," the hermit said. "But remember, not every treasure is worth the risk." Jack and David thanked the hermit and made their way back to the village. As they walked, Jack couldn't stop thinking about how close they had come to being trapped forever. When they finally returned home, they shared their story with the villagers. Jack's tale became a warning to others about the dangers of greed and the mysterious river deep in the forest. From that day on, Jack lived a life free of greed, content with what he had, and grateful for the wisdom of his friend David. He understood that true treasure wasn't found in riches or gold, but in the bonds of friendship and the lessons learned along the way. Moral of the story is, greed blinds us to the dangers that surround us, but true wisdom and friendship guide us back to safety.